FinTechTT, Rudolph Hanamji,
You got it, you got it, you got it.
Yeah.
you got it.
And of course, our featured guest speaker from the US, Allyn Shaw, who is the COO of the Office of the Chief Technology Office in Wells Fargo. So I'm not going to do most of the speaking today. To our lovely panelists and guest speakers. So I will start it off with Allyn to open it up and just kind of discuss from where you sit at Wells Fargo, from where you sit in all of your positions and boards, how do you see the future going forward in terms of digital transformation and DEI?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's been days and this beautiful, beautiful. Oh, my niece, the mark. Okay.
What are you projecting?
Hi. 1 second. How about now? All right, great. So I'll start over. How about that? Again, I'm Allyn Shaw. I am a part of the U.S. Speaker Program, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of the Chief Technology Office at Wells Fargo. What I was stating earlier was that it's been an amazing few days spending time here in the country and learning the Trembagonian ways, learning about your government, learning more about your people and cultures. And I'm really conversation with some of my esteemed colleagues on the panel today. A couple of things, this technology and diversity in general. One of the things that I've accomplished over my last 30 years of being in technology and finance is that it starts with people, it starts with humans. Humans, it's, human is plural, right? It's not single. And when you start to really peel back that onion, you start to realize that technology should be enabling experiences. Technology is nothing without the emotion behind it, without the people that leverage it, without the ability to really think about the communities that rely on it. We talked, over the last few days to migrant communities. We've talked to youth, right? How they communicate effectively across oceans, continents, and it's all comes down to technology. It's how about technology and the use of technology in our communities. I've also heard a lot of conversations around concerns around bias. And how do we make sure that technology in general is free from bias? And of course, the way that you at least get after that is making sure that you have diverse teams behind your technology companies, making sure you're thinking about ethnicity, you're thinking about religion, you're thinking about the freedom of thought and philosophy and methodologies to approaching everyday life problems. And the way you get after that is making sure that the people representing your product, the individuals coding that algorithm, the people that are thinking about the technology, the capabilities that you're putting out in the market are diverse and very, very much so representative of the communities that they serve. So I'm again glad to be here. I'm glad to talk about technology. I'm glad to talk about finance. And with that, I just going to hand it over to one of my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Thank you. Maria Daniel, here as president of FinTechTT. On my other hats, I'm a partner at EY, Strategy and Transactions. 90% of my work is with financial services companies. And, in recent years, doing digital strategy for a number of companies. And I'll just start off the panel and ask Anna and Leah afterwards. But what I want to ask you, though, is, when you look at the Wells Fargo journey and, digital first, and you're talking about humans, and, the whole, when you say the diversity, and you have to make sure the AI, so when I think of AI, right, it's machine learning. And, how do you really ensure that the machine learning really doesn't get that bias on the humans? So you can have, how do you test it? When I speak to other fintech who I work, and I tell them about Trinidad and Tobago, I tell them this is a great testing ground because we have so many ethnicities, we have so much religion, etc. But, how did you do that, Wells Fargo? Or have you been able to do it?
Yeah, and that's an awesome kind of way to start off. And the way I'd like to talk about it, I don't want to just focus on just my Wells Fargo experience.
Okay, great.
I've been doing this for 30 years. So I've worked for Japanese companies, technology companies, tech companies. So I'm going to be answering just from my own experience. The answer to the question is that, to your point, machines have to learn, right? Which means they have to be taught. And the way you teach machines is you make sure that you're feeding it data that is not biased. Make sure that data is not biased. Is you create data sets that are representative of cultures and ethnicities and perspectives. And so the way you create, and let's agree, there's always going to be some sort of bias. There's going to be some form of it. The key is how do you detect it? The key is monitoring it. The key is making sure that at least and I mentioned this a little bit in my opening statement, making sure that the teams that are responsible for creating that AI are diverse in and of themselves, and that they have controls in place to make sure, to your point, you test out that language. For example, if you want to make sure that you're not being biased against women or people that are women identifying, you want to make sure you test that product with a population of various women's across the diaspora, right? Not just women from America or women from Europe, but maybe female identifying women as well. So there's ways to make sure controls in place to create a data set that is representative of the community, but then you've got to always test that out and make sure that the results that you're getting back is true to the data.
Great, and I'm gonna hand it over to Anna here, and here's why. So in the Caribbean, our big, I think, at least from what I see from my own clients, digital transformation perspective is data. Right, and one of the stumbling blocks is people have not spent the time capturing data. So, and I'm gonna ask you from your perspective, what you have seen in terms of being able to do digital transformation, what were some of the challenges you see in the local context? I know from my own experience, a lot of it is data. And it's one of the challenges I see for fintech companies as well, which their whole model is really using data.
So I think that, to begin with, I think before COVID, our country is a conservative one, and our acceptance of change has always been, in my view, one that's been as the voters, let's make sure things are all right, and then make some decisions. So before COVID, you found that digital transformation was one that was rather slow. And of course, during COVID, we've all had the disruption of, okay, what do we do now? And I was quite impressed with what we were able to do in our country. I found a lot of the customers that we work with in our business able to pivot, able to understand what it was like to be in a remote meeting and understand what that behavior could be. And we have seen that uptake of more, okay, we need to understand how do we become that digitally transformed. And certainly there is the understanding of the data and understanding what do I want to do and how do I do it and where do I put it? Some of the questions that we are asking and our customers are asking us. And it's a struggle. I have to say it is a struggle, but I am seeing that people are willing to go through and understand and take their time, but they understand that they are going to see a lot of profitability or lower costs and increased efficiency. So there's a want to do it, but the how is where a lot of people are still struggling with. I don't know what I'm going to do. Where do I start? Do I start in the middle with improving my process, or do I start at the beginning and scanning all my data? And then, where do I want to be? So I think for us, the fact that there's a want is certainly the beginning of where we will end up.
Can I build on that?
Sure.
I love what you just said about that, right? And one of the things that I've learned and I've encountered is language matters as well. And when you're creating, whether it's a mobile application or it's software, if that software or that technology is being distributed globally, then the best way to make sure that it is contextually accurate and resonates with that particular community is you go and you test that community, you employ people in that community, right? If you're going to deploy technology and people, then you need to get Canadians that are literally giving you feedback and helping you build. So I love that data is an asset, right? It's not just information, actually. So I think that.
And I'm gonna shift it across to you Rudy, from the perspective of, if I think of COVID forced us to change, right? The digital transformation, even the banks. We have international banks in Trinidad and Tobago. The online services, I would say, was very below par. Now it's really, convenient, easy to use. So again, Anna is right, the transformation is taking place. So I'm gonna ask you from the PrideTT part of it. When we talk about inclusiveness, DEI, do you see that this really has to be changed, forced change through mandated policies to really get inclusiveness across Trinidad and Tobago?
Thanks, Marina. So full disclosure, one of my hats is my boss. So, but I'll actually start there. I happen to be one of the privileged persons in Trinidad and Tobago that works in a company and has worked in companies where the lack of mandated social pay has not stopped those companies from implementing their own policies and to have champions in leadership roles who themselves have experienced exclusion and have used that experience to chart space for other people. So it's a strange answer, but no, you actually don't need mandated change. You need people in the society, the private sector in particular, but just general individuals to recognize that all of us are products in this island at least of some form of discrimination and legacies of exclusion and oppression. And in that commonality, why would we want to exacerbate that or maintain that structure? So those of us with privileges, where we sit, we need to use that and design our systems, our software, our business policies to be more inclusive. And for companies that have the benefit of inheriting that approach from their global counterparts or headquarters, how do you then influence your local colleagues to think that way? Because CAISO, there's an organization called CAISO that for over a decade has been advocating for change in the legislature. And to this day, if a company wanted to fire me because of my sexual orientation, they could, and the law, it is the only law to my mind here in Trinidad and Tobago that specifically says this law does not include sexual orientation. So as a tax-paying citizen of this country, there is a law that actually excludes me. So if it weren't for my company, I'd be at risk.
Right, you have to change that, put it on the list. Allyn, I'd love to get it from a global perspective, from your own personal perspective, your views around that. Because, in Trinidad, from a ethnicity perspective, I think we're pretty good, even from a woman perspective. There is equity, there'll always be bias. We were having that conversation, and Anna said, she told her husband, can I say it, that you wouldn't understand it because, white males will have these problems. And it's true. Right? We've all experienced it as a woman, or, sometimes I've heard other women tell me, I'm sitting down in the boardroom and they're just not hearing what I'm saying. And then a man gets up and just repeats exactly what I said, and everybody will be like, wow, right? We live that every day. So from your perspective and, your journey, how did you deal, if there were challenges, how did you deal with it?
Yeah. Where do you start? So, three things. I want to talk a little bit maybe about allyship, the difference between allyship and advocacy. I think that's super important. And then I'll talk a little bit about just my experience as a private equity venture funding. I led a green tech company and had raised over $100 million. And when many of you, I'm sure in the audience, have raised capital from Silicon Valley or from Israel, and you've been in boardrooms where you have to pitch your idea, right? You have to explain why you're asking this company that never met you before, by the way, for 10 million, 25 million, $50 million. And in my experience, so often I was the only person of color, right? The only Black person in the room. So often I would sit down and someone would think that I'm the assistant or I'm the person that's there to take notes. Yeah, of course, right. That's why I never ask women, by the way, to take notes. for those who are male identifying, right, never ask a woman to take notes. Take them yourself, darn it. And so I've, just because of the color of my skin, I haven't even got to the point that I'm gay, right? Just because of the color of my skin, already I'm not the boss, or I'm not the one that's the entrepreneur. So we have an obligation of those you talked about privilege, right? We have the opportunity, we have the obligation as individuals that maybe represent underrepresented communities, right? You know, whether it be ethnic underrepresentation or gender, et cetera, to lift as we climb, right? And to make sure that we're not putting others in a similar situation. And by the way, getting to the point of allyship and advocacy, it's great. You talked about mansplaining. It's great for a man in that position that sees another, you know, male identifying person make that faux pas and say, hey, that's not right, right? You know, Anna just said that, or Maria just said that. That's allyship, and that's great, because in that particular moment, you're getting a pat on the back, right? It makes you look good as the person that called out that particular faux pas, or that microaggression, is what it really is. Advocacy is when it's you're not in a room with other people, it's just you and the other person, right? That other person is the one that is generating that microaggression. They're saying something inappropriate in a locker room, or they're saying something inappropriate after leaving a meeting, and clearly whatever is said is not aligned to your values or your company's values. It is that moment that matters the most, because when you tell that person, hey, that's wrong, I don't believe that, I don't agree with that. That's not what our company stands for. That's not what our community stands for. That's not what our government stands for. And you don't accept, do not tolerate that behavior. That's advocacy, right? And we need to do more of that. We have to stop ignoring and allowing those scenarios to pass us. So that's like.
I can just add that.
Sure.
I think earlier we were chatting before the session, and one of the things we were talking about is the thing that every company that I've ever seen has on their wall a list of their values.
Right.
And how many of us have really taken time to understand what those values mean? And in some cases, and this was for me, it's written in a language that looks really good on a wall, but ask any employee and they don't quite understand what the behavior, what do you mean by loyalty? What is the behavior that I have to display for that to be that I'm living value? And I think when you're talking about DEI and you're talking about inclusion and you're talking about technology, when you're doing your design, that is something that you want to consider. What are my values? Not only what do they look like, but what do they look like in terms of the behavior that a human is displaying, no matter where they come from, what they do, so that we can all enjoy the fruits of our labor.
I like that a lot, and I'm gonna use that segue to get back into the technology discussion. So when a company is thinking about digital transformation, and you know, one of the challenges we have in the Caribbean is we have a lot of small economies, right? So, I mean, you have islands with 40,000 people, and a lot of people, and you know, just talking about on the fintech side as well, is, you know, that's a volume-driven service to some extent, right? That's where it all came from. So, you know, when you think of Africa, it was hundreds of millions of people that you could put with a very low fee, but be able to cover your costs. In the Caribbean, however, we don't have that. So you see fintech is actually taking off very, very slowly. So like in your experience, what would be some of the advice? Because we have a lot of the fintech members here and people interested in fintech. And how do you get your solutions out there? How do you help this transformation in these small economies? Kind of a hard question, I know, but it's also to help them realize, and this is what I have seen in the marketplace, is we follow other people's solutions without actually trying to understand what's our problem. So, you know, everybody thinks a wallet is a solution, but, you know, is that really our problem?
Yeah.
So how do you go about from, and Anna said it, you know, when you're designing, when you're thinking of your transformation and you have limited resources, how do you prioritize? Where should I allocate the capital? How should I use it? Where should I spend my development money to really hone in on what's the problem?
I am not gonna answer your question, but and the reason I want to be, I'm gonna be totally honest, I can't speak on what it's like to operate in this economy, right? I wasn't raised here, I was born here, and I certainly don't do business here, but what I can say that I think is adjacent to your question is I'm gonna tie technology and innovation to, you know, the importance of education and the amassing of skills, right? So it's, what you're talking about is innovation.
Mhm.
And in order for a country to innovate, it must create the opportunity and the spaces for its citizens to do so. So then, to me, the question is, all right, what is, Trinidad and Tobago people, citizens, governments, what are we doing about education? How are we creating, pockets where you can have hackathons to learn cybersecurity? How are you creating incubators where you bring in entrepreneurs in to talk about new innovations and new technologies? How do you create opportunities for people to think differently, right? Maybe it's around the energy sector, maybe it's around technology, maybe it's around medical care. So the point I'm making here is, I think the key is making sure that your people, your government creates the opportunity and the access to opportunity and skills so that you are actually creating innovation from your own people in your own country, and then you're able to capture that capability and then monetize it. Then that monetization doesn't have to just be in the Trinidad and Tobago economy. It can be in the region, it can be in Europe, it can be anywhere, but I think it starts with making sure that you're creating the access and creating the spaces to innovate. And that means making sure that you start with your own people.
Sure.
So for more than a decade of my life, I was responsible in a large part to developing these lovely national strategic plans when I was one of your clients. And others, but no, I used to ask people, do you all know what $400 million looks like? And they would think, well, a suitcase of money or something, or a gold bar. I would say, no, it looks about this high. Because on my desk, for all those years, whether it's in the tourism sector, technology space, financial services, creative industry, because I've cut across all three, I had a collection, I still have some of them. And it costs us as a people, at least that high, close to $500 million. And I've been to government offices where there are even more of those documents. So Allyn, to your point is, a few days ago, Google was leveraged to place Trinidad and Tobago on our national instrument on the global map like has never been done before. And I remember meeting with Peter Minshall once, who's one of our mass leaders, iconic. He said, and it's very dramatic, he said, imagine a man, a poor man, sees an oil, stinky steel drum in the road, and he takes this drum and he crafts it into the most magical, I'm paraphrasing, but it's kind of like, that's how it speaks, right? This magical instrument that is so, and to him, that was the prime example of how innovative we are as people. But then he went on to speak about all of the problems that we put in front of ourselves. And these strategic plans exist, but why have we not implemented? I think that, Maria, we talk about it all the time, and at AMCHAM and TG, we talk implementation and execution.
Well, digital transformation seems to be the new buzzword, believe it or not, the new buzzword. And Anna, I'm gonna ask you this question. So recently, everybody would have probably seen in the news that the government got this loan, 100 million plus. So I'm gonna ask you, if you had that 100 million plus, how would you spend it in Trinidad and Tobago knowing what you know, that you think could make the biggest impact to the country, digitally? Sound like I'm assuming you spend a question.
Yeah, boy. Hurry up, every second. Yeah, that's a real tough boy. I think, actually I was on a chat with AMCHAM. It was the first time that one of the first times that the AMCHAM chat really just sparked a lot of conversation, and a lot of persons had something to say about the spend for that amount of money. And I think for me, I mean, I can only speak for me, and I know that AMCHAM is also very involved in digital transformation. It's one of the pillars of their operations and what they're trying to move forward in the country. And for us, I think the education of people is where perhaps there should be some priority for the spend of that money. Because I think that, and you were just saying it earlier, you know, if we don't educate and teach people about digital, then the innovation may not be as fast. And somebody said it to me at the last conference that we were attending. They asked the question, like, why wouldn't in our school curriculums, would we not have a class around digital? And it just struck me that, oh my God, yes, why does it, yes, we want geography, yes, we want social studies, yes, English, yes, math, but how many of us are teaching our children on how to use this phone? And what are the risks around just this phone? And we all give our children at 8 years old or whatever. So yes, we have a ton of issues. Yes, we've done 1,000 gap analysis on where we should spend the money. But for me, I think the education of children should probably be one of the priorities.
Yeah, well, the whole curriculum needs to change. I don't want to say my age, but 30 plus years ago, when I did computer science, I looked at the curriculum and it's exactly the same. That's sad to see. But yeah, sure.
Can I add something to that? You sparked a thought. I worked prior to being with Wells Fargo as the chief operating officer and managing director of cybersecurity for Bank of America, actually. And one of the programs that I led was in a city in the United States. And what they did differently, to your point, is they installed in high school. So these are individuals coming out of junior high, kind of intermediate, going into high school and prior to college. What they did differently is they provided cybersecurity education to those students early on, to your point, right? And what happened, and these particular groups of students had a very low rate of going to college, right? These were underrepresented communities, right? So they said, all right, what's a skill that they can be taught early on that would then persist? And that skill was cybersecurity. So what we found is after giving them the cybersecurity education, they were graduating high school with their cybersecurity certifications. And of course, at least in the United States, there are 3 million plus jobs in cyber going unfilled every single day. So now you've got an individual that normally would not have had a path to success, making, $125,000 US dollars right out of high school. So that's a great example of building the infrastructure to I think that's a great point.
And I mean, don't let us miss this, right? Because they're born now being able to use an iPad.
That's right.
Right? When I have any technology problems, I just hand it over to them and they can solve it. But it's also education of the population, not to fear technology. As you said before, in your statement, it's the people and the technology is just an enabler. And I think one of the issues we have is that people fear that if they adopt new technology, they will lose jobs,
Yes.
They're not accepting the change. So I think that's one of our challenges. But I want to stop here to open up for questions. That's exactly what I was thinking. So Rose, how you want to do this? You want to just take the microphone and ask the question and then open up the floor as well?
So we do have an online question, which I'll read out for the panelists. It says, to the host, how do you innovate? Sorry, my vision is not good enough to read that from there. How do you innovate in Trinidad and overcome the legal system and political barriers? So how do you innovate given these legal and political barriers?
That's a great question. I always think that I'll hand it to the other two getting their 2 cents before. when we think of innovation, you have to have environment for people to innovate, and that starts with failure. So Alan, you wouldn't know this, but our school system starts at 10, 11 years old. There's an exam that puts these children under extreme pressure that they feel if they fail, that's the end of the road. So to me, when we talk about innovation, the first thing we have to have is a culture that accepts failure. Because the only way you can innovate is you have to try, right? We have to try. We have to get, and our school system is all about regurgitation. It's not about critical thinking. And innovation, again, comes from critical thinking. It comes from being able to find a problem and understanding the root cause. Root cause is a word I use all the time, because that's how we end up with the wrong solutions, right? So root cause. And once we start to teach from very young, even before we start digital, but how to analyze a problem, then we'll be able to drive innovation. And if we take that across the country and we take it across the political and everything else, and we move away from all the noise that we love in this country, and we start focusing on what is the root cause, then I feel we will start to see real innovation. So that's just how it's.
I think you just said it all. But I would just, maybe just to build on your point of, fail fast, but bounce back faster.
Exactly.
I mean, I know it's cliched, but I never like the word try anymore. I like the word practice, because in business, we are evolutionary. Your business is never going to, it's not something that has an end if it can continue. And the only way a business is ever going to continue is through the innovation.
Yep.
When you look at businesses that are littered and not continued, Blockbuster comes to mind. It's because they just didn't innovate. But innovation does not have to be this huge, idea. I think people think innovation has to be this amazing idea of Netflix, but you don't think that Netflix really started at a very small stage. So I would just add that it's incremental and it doesn't have to cost a lot. There are lots of open source solutions out there. There's lots of free stuff out there. You just need to have a problem and that you want to solve.
And sometimes these solutions just come about, right? Look at the post-it, how many people think, why didn't I think of that? People that you just stick on, like, what are you gonna add to that?
When I was studying innovation, one of our lecturers told us people only change for pain or for pleasure.
Right.
And unfortunately, most times the pain. Jamaica has become an interesting example to me in the Caribbean of how a burning platform led them to restructure their societies and their politics. Because a lot of people don't know that the private sector has to approve the national budget. Now that came out of the IMF reconstruction. And they did a presentation, and I forgot his name right now, the head of the private sector body there. And he was talking about it the first time. Now, I'm not saying that we should be at the IMF store, right? That's a whole other part.
That'll be the headline.
But Pride says IMF. So, but he explained that IMF said, look, you have to restructure your debt. And interestingly, in Jamaica, the debt was owned by the private sector. So when the government went to the private sector said, okay, we'll restructure the debt because it's our country too. But we have to have a say in what you're going to spend the money on. Because we've learned from this before. At first, the government said no. Went to the IMF sent them back. Said, sorry, they had no choice. So what I'm getting at, we talk a lot, Alan, in our advocacy world about intersectionality. You're talking about innovation in the business world. It's the same concepts in the advocacy world. You have to collaborate. We can't do this individually. We all have to get together. Maria spoke about faith. You have to have courage. But courage comes from collaboration because you're not alone. And also you have to get involved in the political process. We can't be afraid. Imagine a trans persons like Marty P. Johnson, who started Pride globally with Sylvia Rivera in Trinidad, Sasha Fierce and Brandy Rodriguez, both of whom we've lost to violence. They had nothing. They literally had nothing. But where did they get their courage from to stand in the face of adversity and the politics and say, this must change? So if they could do it, why can't we do it with everything that we have in front of us, technology included, which they didn't have?
Great answer. I want to open up the floor, sure.
I'm good. Afternoon, I have one question for the second one on the far right. You spoke about, yeah, my right. You spoke about the strategic plans that pile up and how spent millions and millions of dollars on developing the strategic plans, and I think it's a far from my problem. And I'm wondering, what role can digital transformation play in getting these strategic plans that we've been looking at for decades? I've always said that, you know, my master's thesis is sitting out in UAE collecting dust, and I
So
can't be the
mine,
only
yeah.
one. And we have all of these ideas. I don't think our region is lacking in ideas and talent. We go abroad, it's a Trinidad, it's a Jamaican, it's a Grenadian running the show. So what I want to know is, now that we're in a digital space and new generation that's more accepting of technology, what can we do as those are coming up, and, you know, with the advice of those who, not to discredit those who have gone before us, how can we now take all of these strategic plans, use the digital space to create actual change for the generations coming?
Take it.
You want to take it?
Digitize the politician.
Actually, there's something in this country called the Freedom of Information Act. And most of us don't use it. A little bit of a process. But I think it starts with getting access to the information. Those of us who do the work, we know it. We have access to the documents. But a lot of these things should be made public, or at least the ones that aren't, they should be shared. And then the companies, the innovators, people will see the plan, the roadmap, and they will be able to implement from it. I think that's what we try to do with FinTechTT, right?
Yeah. Anna, you wanna? No. Sure.
I'm always happy to share perspective. You know, what came to mind when I heard you ask the question was, well, where are we? Let me back up. I think that government and private, public and private, play their own respective parts. I think when it comes to innovation, that takes a long time. There are certain technologies, you know, what send someone to the moon, that takes decades, right? That's best on a government balance sheet, right? That's how you fund those type of ideas. When it comes to ideas like maybe ideas of collaboration applications or ability to create you know, changes in the human behavior via technology, those things can come via private enterprise, right? Quick applications by entrepreneurs. The point I'm making is that I think there's an opportunity to leverage private equity and venture capital, right? Get other people involved that represent different perspectives of your sector, of your community. And instead of everything having to go through government, why not bring it to private enterprise? Why not get people involved to say, you know what, maybe this particular part of the sector, or this particular set of entrepreneurs could take this part of the idea. And then this other group can say, you know what, we can take this up, we can build this part of the idea, we can build, then now you're sourcing funding, you're sourcing capital, you've got individuals within your communities, in your private sector and public sector, bring in some researchers from, I think that's the way to do it. It doesn't always have to be the government. Don't forget, we're the government, we're the people, we make up the government, so why not bring it to the private?
The only thing I would say to that, and you know, we've done these private equity and tried private equity, and it goes back again to the ecosystem, right? And I think where we fail there as not a country, but as a region, is we haven't been able to bring our small numbers together for something big, right? So when we talk about crypto and we talk about digital currency, the problem is we can't move money across the Caribbean easily. But are we really spending the time and the money on a regional solution, right? So it goes back again to the problems, but one of the answers to your question is simple, accountability. You know, if we demanded that when these monies are spent on these studies, that they made public, and somebody has to answer, well, why is it not being done? But that's on us, right? You know, we complain about governments, we complain about politicians, but we put them there, right? So the only people we can blame is us. So the change really has to come here. And, you know, in Trinidad, we tend to be very decent. That's why we're so happy. That's why we get along, right? We're not really the ones that will go through the streets. Well, you have it, but it's a good and a bad, right? So I think accountability is to me, we have to make people accountable, starting with ourselves. Sure.
Do we get that accountability through regulation? Because I'm thinking about the legislation currently. Does that actually support or hinder fintech, digital transformation, use of technology? I know recently some of our Eastern Caribbean partners have implemented virtual asset legislation. Do you think that that's actually something that could be applicable here as well? So I'm looking at legislation and the regulation part of it.
You want to respond to it? Like, go ahead.
Briefly, and then I have a question. I think beyond legislating everything, I think one of the important things is that we don't even have the knowledge to legislate. We have the wrong people legislate. People who have no understanding. People who have no understanding of matters, the subject matters, are making decisions about us going forward. And just to kind of touch on something that you guys have spoken about and maybe to ask a few questions around it. Digital transformation has become a buzz phrase. Innovation, buzz phrase, technology, buzz phrase, but we've not gotten to the core of what technology is. The Post-it note is a technology, right? We think of technology as only things that are digital, computer, electronic, but anything can be, any form of innovation is technology. The toilet was a form of technology, right? And I think we need to change the way we think about technology and go back to, you know, thinking from first principles and understanding the core problems. And earlier you guys asked a question about, you know, the costs and the benefits and how companies might start undertaking these transformations. And I think we need to stop looking at the revenue generation opportunities from digital transformation and start looking at maybe cost saving opportunities. And here's where we will find the money, because we are wasting a lot of money doing it the wrong way. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I thought that was a good statement.
Yeah.
Question.
Anna, you wanna?
No, you start. I'll finish you.
You know, you're right, and I think Anna kind of mentioned it too, that when we talk about innovation, and I tell my clients this all the time, you know, innovation could just be making a process better.
Yes.
Right? It could just be making a process better. But to step back a little bit of what you're seeing on the legislative part, it is a good point. You know, it's making sure we have the right people in the right places. Also, to be unafraid to put younger people in some of these positions, right? So we have scholarships, national scholarships, where scholarship winners have to come back actually and work in the government. But yet, I'm sure, and I know this because we try to hire them all the time, they're not given the opportunity to bring what they've learned. So we're not using the young people who are coming out with the knowledge. They don't have the experience, but again, this is where collaboration comes in. You know, get people from different places to also mentor these young people. So, because our government's supposed to be, if you think about it, have the brightest people. They get in the first pick of our open scholars every single year. So the question is, if we have this available to us, why are we not using it for exactly what you're saying? You know, you have these young people coming out, knowing about crypto, how it's supposed to work, you know, educating people what does digital mean instead of billing fair. So I think that's part of the issue.
I think just to build on both of your points is that, you know, there are people working to make the change happen. So it's not as if this is happening without anything
Agreed.
going on. There is legislation that already exists. Some people
No.
don't even realize that in Trinidad and Tobago, we have one of the best pieces of legislation around electronic and fintech stuff. Just really mind blowing, and they're actually coming up with a second version right now. But as well is some of our executives just don't even understand how they can save money. I mean, I was talking to an executive the other day, and I said, 30% of your time is spent looking for a document. 30%. 30% of your salary is going into trying to find a document, make a document, recreate a document. I mean, we've all had that experience. And yet the person just couldn't take that image in their head, put that into an ROI, and they just couldn't make that connection. And so I think in the government and in all of our lives, that's something that you want to also consider, is that while technology it's an idea, and making it real to people is where that gap is.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. But here's where the issue again, change. So people spend a lot of money on technology. And they always say, when I spend all this money, but I'm not getting any cost savings. Well, okay, but we haven't changed the process, right? It's just like the example we given before. You went online, you fill out everything, you get excited, and then the next instruction is please print and deliver.
Wow.
Right? So all that has done is automated the process. It hasn't transformed the process. So I think that's where the issues lie, right? So we want to spend money on technology. You can't spend any money on technology and then don't change anything. So it's all of that. Any other questions?
Before I give the question to the room, I want to turn to a comment online. So we have a comment that says, the companies delivering digital projects should be the core focus so that they can scale the objectives at hand. Apprenticeships and education projects that you mentioned should be driven through existing digital companies who are actually doing these projects with visions or projects, apps, applications, and strategy. Funding businesses and TNT's main challenge is to scale the digital solutions, create these ecosystems.
Yep, totally agree.
And now I'll let.
Thank you. I want to ask our featured guests a question that really is along our lines of our tune that we're going to have on digital transformation. So as a region, context and culture is important to the student that we're going to take. What digital transformation means different to different persons based on their stage, their business, whatever the case is. If we ask 10 different persons what digital transformation means to them, we may get someone saying it needs to digitalize everything, to go online, to maybe improve a process using some low code development, maybe robotic process automation. My question to you is, based on where we are, where we're at as a country, now getting this money and we're going to embark on this journey of digital transformation, you would have been involved in different businesses, different stages, and you would have appreciation of how different people define their digital transformation journey. What tips would you give us in general persons at different journeys in understanding what that digital transformation is to them?
I think there's a couple of different approaches to that, right? So I'm glad to hear that I heard $100 million. That's amazing. It's bigger than my budget. So that's great. A couple of thoughts. I think number one, look, a great idea can come from anywhere. And I think not sourcing great ideas from your citizens, I think that would be a mistake. So I think starting with, bringing people to forums, bringing people to auditoriums, and asking, and maybe maybe there's some type of reward or prize or, right, but just get your people thinking differently about, look, you live in Trinidad and Tobago every single day. What are 3 things that you think can change, that can improve the lives of Trinbagonians, or improve the way the government can operate, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's one, source ideas from your local citizens and create that momentum. That's one. 2, don't let the enemy of, or don't let perfection become the enemy of good, right? So there's nothing wrong with quick wins, low code, no code, quick process improvements, right? There are things that can be changed relatively straightforward, that can create a lot of lift for your companies, your citizens. So I think that, having your aperture be very broad and not just going for that one idea that might happen in 10 years and ignoring the 50 ideas that you can get going and get down the road. I think lastly, and again, part of, this gentleman said it earlier, right? I absolutely agree with you, right? Innovation is a multitude of things. It could be a process, it could be actually technology, it could be the way people thinking, like changing the diagram, changing the paradigm of the question. But I think that it would be super important to not take some of those dollars and actually build the infrastructure required to then enable innovation, enable transformation, whether it be digital transformation or how people live every single day, right? I think that's important as well. Like, take some of those dollars and invest in the future, knowing that this $25 million is not going to pay off in the next 12 months, but whether it's we're building schools, we're bringing in companies, tech companies to set up shop, whatever the case may be, and you know that that's going to be an improvement that will happen in 10 years out or 20 years out of making that investment. Those are my thoughts.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I wanted to ask you a question. Ask the question first and then explain why I asked you. My question is, in Wells Fargo, right? How do you get executives to feel comfortable with experimentation? I ask the question because I used to work at Bank of America. 10 years ago, they used to have lab where cryptos come in, and there's a lot of experimentation. I do believe that the private sector is the best place to read, especially in Trinidad, to support innovation. But to support innovation, you need to experiment, you need to test, you need to be confident in spending money and losing it, and hoping that you get a big win, just like a bet account. So my question to the panel, so like, how do you, especially in your case, how do you get your colleagues to be comfortable with taking that risk of experimentation?
I used to work at Bank of America as well. We can trade stories. Over 16 years. So I've seen a lot. I think so. It's a couple of different ways I would approach it. We approach it. Number one, you have to incent it, right? So people behave based on how they're compensated. I get it. It's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. But if I'm going to get paid to do it, then that's an extra added bonus. And so you have to incent executives, people to fail fast, fail responsibly, fail with a purpose, but to fail fast. And that's part of the journey. It's part of the work that you need to do as a leader. Make sure that we are exploring and make sure that we're creating practices that allows for us to see around those corners. So that the first thing is you have to incent it, make it a part of their incentive, their pay for performance structure. So that's one. Two, you have to create psychological safety. Right? So we say things like fail fast, and then when you fail, you get called into the office, or you get a poor performance evaluation, or someone says, well, why did you do that? So you have to be very intentional and very deliberate with the language and the energy you put around this culture of innovation and failing fast. Right? You have to create that psychological safety, and when someone does quote unquote fail, talk about what was learned. right? This is what we learned from that experiment. So experimentation is really what it is, right? This is what we learned from that experiment, and this is how we can apply the fruits and the lessons from that experiment across not just this one sector, but across maybe multiple products, right? So that's the second one, right, which is the psychological safety. And I think number three is I think you have to, I know you have to actually carve it out in the budget.
Yeah.
Right? Actually have a line in your budget that says, this is the lab, right? This is the, call it innovation, call it experimentation, right? Here are the people that will aid and support in that. They're purposely hired to do that work. Getting people out of college is a great way of getting innovative thinking and out of the box thinking so that you're not stuck in how someone like me, 16 years being there, right? So, and then have a line for losses. We know that we're going to lose X amount of dollars, so we're going to invest X amount of dollars and just carve that out, call it R&D, call it what you need. But that's how you create a culture of practice and experimentation. And then when people feel free, psychologically free to, oh, I can experiment, I can wander, I can, try new things. That's when you really kick into high gear, because people are not afraid, they're not holding back. So.
Sure, of course.
As someone, I believe in this mantra, which is better to beg for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Maria has already tried that. You fired me like what, 4 times
Yeah,
already? You have to sometimes know your craft so well, do your homework, and take a personal risk sometimes, and show the executive that you knew this was. Trust me, when it does, they'll be the first one to pat you on the back and pose for the camera. But I mean, if it fails, well, but I will never forget, I worked once for someone who was very, very conservative. And well, the owner of the company was very conservative, and he took no risks. He wanted to know for a guarantee that if you spent $1, you would make more than if you took the $1. He said this, if I took the $1 and put it in the bank, you have to make more money than that bank interest. Otherwise, I'm putting the $1 there. And the CEO at the time, she took a chance on some of us, and she was an ally in the truest sense. And she's like, go ahead and try. And if something happens, I will, I'll bat for you, kind of. And the kind of success that we had, I never forgot. Called me. I was walking in out the courtyard one day, and he called me and said, I'm going to sit here for a minute. So I thought, what the hell is this man? He could be a very intense person. Says, all cats like to be stroked, but you don't have to stroke them every day. But ever so often, you should. And he handed me an envelope, and it was a bonus check, which I had never expected this man in my life to pay me. I thought he was going to fire me. But that is a true experience of taking personal risks and knowing what you're about and proving them right or wrong.
But we probably have to wrap up, right? The only thing I'll add to that is the value of diversity. Because you will never have innovation if everyone thinks the same way, then nothing new will take part. I mean, we were talking about this in entrepreneurship yesterday, and somebody was saying, how do you get these entrepreneurial thinkers? And I said, well, first of all, do not hire the ones that just look like everyone else, because the little quirky personalities, they're the ones that usually come with something that none of us are thinking about. So that's the only thing I will add to that. So we need to wrap up. Allyn, I'm actually going to ask you to close us off.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
opening and closing from our guests.
Great.
Maybe you could talk about, the greatest of Trinidad and Tobago.
doubles.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks again for having me, and again, this is a rich gorgeous, beautiful, amazing country. And I know you all know it because this is why you're here today. This is you're visible, you're present, you showed up, and that's super important. I want to thank my panelists, right? Yeah, no, Anna, Maria, Rudolph, thank you. I think so often we miss opportunities to collaborate. Right, bring people in from different countries, bring people in from different companies, different sectors. Throw a problem on the table. Right, it doesn't matter how big or small, just throw the problem on the table and let those bright minds get after it. That's innovation, right? Just taking a different approach to solving problems can be innovative in and of itself. So I appreciate the time that you all spend with me, and I love learning, right, and learning from it. And then lastly, I have to do a plug for the speaker program.
Yeah.
No, I really, really do. Several years ago, I signed up to become a US speaker. And it was after, I won't actually talk about that former president at the time, but I thought I want to do something different. I want to help my country. And I thought, how can I do that? Well, I used to be a poor Black gay kid from Compton, California. And I have some ideas too. And I thought, you know what, I may have something to share with others. And so I became a part of the program, and kind of where I fit is cybersecurity and technology. And then this entire D&I, LGBTQI lens. I hope that other countries do something similar. Because when you bring diversity to the table, brilliance comes out the other end of it. So thanks again for the opportunity. Thanks for having me.